Good evening, everyone. System Chalk here with hopefully the fifth episode of The Bright Young Thing, playing as David Ellison. So I'm finally kind of back to normal as far as the world and everything is concerned, but I have sort of lost the plot a bit as far as how the playthrough's going. So as usual, especially after a week of doing things. I'm going to take a second to review the position. Although I'm very happy to say that things have picked up as far as work is concerned. So I'm no longer at Glover and Glover, and probably not living the Bright Young Things life. But hopefully that will mean that I get to spend some more time with all of you with Cultist Simulator. So, coming up, we've got a season of Despair. I don't think I have that much to worry about so far as dread is concerned. I don't think any of the books that I'll be reading will generate dread, and I don't have too much that I don't think I have too much that I need to do that would potentially generate dread. Visions abate, so we've gotten past the fascination due to fleeting reminiscence. And then the Weary Detective's already on the case, and I thought for some reason we had... Yes, we do have notoriety. That's it. Okay. So I was thinking that there may be some difficulty as far as notoriety is concerned. And I don't actually have a good answer for that, seeing as I don't have a heart follower yet. But I do want to continue making a living as far as painting is concerned, so maybe there's just a way that I can sort of extend the... extend the treadmill and see what we can do. Okay, so we are not paying for paints because I need to get rid of the staleness. I am buying books from Moorlands. I'm feeding my imagination. Now I'm trying to think why I did that. I did that probably so that I can get the other level of lessons learned. So if I'm not mistaken, so we've got the lesson learned here. We were upgrading the other. Lesson learned. I popped these two for the remaining 4, and then I should already have the lore that I need, although maybe I would want to think about what I'm trying to accomplish. Well, we can think about that at the time. There may be a better way for me to approach upgrading lore and such. I know for a lot of time I've been working on secret histories, but that doesn't mean that every playthrough has to have the same sort of scholarship and imagination traits. Okay, moving on. Entering the woods. So here I think we're just collecting secret histories. Occasionally rumors as well, but because we're currently under investigation, it may be a good idea for me to minimize the amount of notoriety that I generate. And finally, we're speaking of esoteric matters, which hopefully will result in more followers, but failing that, we'll wind up with a mentor as well. We obviously have a few to handle. Another thing is I would, if I can, like to focus a little bit on generating some more lantern lore, seeing as we have a substantial commission. So, anyways, probably things that were familiar to everyone who's watching the playlist start to finish, but important for me to follow through on. So let's see what fortune brings us. I'm not 100% sure how I'm going to handle the affliction here. I think we'll probably just see what happens. I suspect actually it's going to be... Well, okay, actually here's how I can handle it. I just need to make sure that I do this before it crosses the 60-second mark. But maybe we'll see if we get lucky as far as vitality is concerned. And if we don't, then we just pay for the medicine. Okay, the artist's reward. My recent work is considered notable. I've exhibited the latest paintings publicly. Surely someone will buy something. Okay, more mystique, or possibly what we'd already put in. I didn't really take a close look. So there's the lesson learned. Now we've been extending the life of the lesson learned doing this, which is not necessarily a bad strategy. Actually, come to think of it, I don't even need to read the collections of poetry at this point, because it takes the same amount of time. We have got 3 staleness, which is not great. Normally, what I would want to do here is a pure passion paint. Well, actually, let's have it both ways. So let's take our fevered imagination. I'll add the notoriety. Now, again, eventually I'm going to have to pay. I'm going to have to pay for my deeds as far as as far as the mystique is, or as far as the investigation is concerned. But let's actually add the 3 passion here now. That may not necessarily be enough to push back the staleness, but what it does do is it lets me preserve the life of the lessons learned. So throw that one in there. That gives us time to combine this glimmering. So we may still need to pop a collection of poetry, but this gives me something to sell at Oriflamme's if the need arises. Now, one other thing that's worth saying as far as the playthrough is concerned. So one thing that I think is very common for people to say, it's like, oh, well, why don't you just do physical labor? That way you get a vitality. That way you get your, you can raise it up. And I think probably by now people have sort of fallen into that groove of working as a day laborer to get your strength up. And then, when you're sufficiently swole, then you go and work at a bank. Maybe not quite true to life, but, then again, you can sort of say, well, when you don't have skills, you take a certain set of jobs, and as you build up your skills, perhaps through the pursuit of the arcane arts, maybe then you do go to a place like that. But it doesn't, I don't know, like, to me, I do not feel very comfortable with the idea of someone who's sort of in the lap of luxury, forced to go out on their own. And as far as the character that we've built here, right, is going out in their own, even so far as the temptation is concerned, and has actually been able to make a go of it as far as the painting is concerned. We're sort of hitting a little bit of trouble between some health problems as well as the investigations, maybe some of the things that poor old Papa would need to deal with. But for the most part, we've been able to handle that on our own. And so while I wouldn't rule out the possibility of doing physical labor, it doesn't strike me as the sort of thing that would be a natural path to follow for a character like this. Now, much like whether you play a computer RPG or whether you play any other kind of game that allows you to have a bit of a character, you can see how some people will want to play a character that's sort of a reflection of themselves, or maybe even just an outright copy of themselves in sort of some science fiction, fantasy, horror setting. So, if you play Call of Cthulhu for whatever reason, you really just don't feel good about yourself and decide that you should subject yourself to the horrors of Lovecraft's world. There's a type of person who's really going to who's always is going to sort of write down what their character is. And of course, naturally, we tend to overestimate our charisma and wisdom and intelligence stats because, let's face it, that's who we are. But there's another type of person who will play a role-playing game, and they want to do something that is completely different. So, I think, at the risk of sounding a little too conceited, I don't think it would be unfair for me, if I'm playing something like D&D, to say, okay, well, you're one of the mage characters, obviously. And you know what? Fair enough, right? I'm incredibly weak and useless, except for a very narrow set of things. And so, why not? But, maybe I can turn around and say, okay, well, the reason why I play games is for a fun fantasy, or for, to try and do something different. I want to play a different role. And so in that case, maybe I want to be, the mighty warrior first in line and taking all the hits, someone physically courageous, which is something that I'm quite happy to have never had to test in real life. And that's a completely legitimate way of going as well. So the reason why I'm taking the time to talk about this stuff is that even though there are different legacies that the game gives you, first of all, your first choice is whether or not you name your character. I really feel everyone should at least name their character, but you see people play it, and there's a lot of enter character name here items. But on top of that, and one of the reasons for that is just simply because as you continue to read the game, as you continue to read the cards, it will talk about the previous characters. And so I tend to feel like you're denying yourself that nice experience of, that through line of the different characters and seeing the echo of the previous playthrough come up. So, it's not just a role-playing thing. I think the game is a little bit more interesting when you see a name from a previous run. It's not just that, it's not just that was, oh, I lost, or oh, I got to the completion and we're going to ignore that now. It's more, oh, okay, there are echoes of what happened coming up inside the game here, even if they're not things that have major effects. So like the major effects from previous playthrough will be the legacy options that you get in the following in the following playthrough, and then some of the names of the different characters and such. If you look at the save file, it'll tell you all the information that it records. But again, whether or not you decide to sort of play a character inside of this game, I think there's value in terms of putting down the label. But for me, it's always nice to kind of have a few stakes that I put in the ground in terms of who this person is. And that's mostly just because I get a chance to sort of mark the change. And I can even remember this happened in one of the, I believe it was actually one of the series that I recorded for this. I fully had intended to have this murderous playthrough where I would actually kill Alden, which is something I do quite rarely. And it turns out for that one, Alden retired within like the first couple of work shifts. Or maybe that was a live stream, now that I remember, think of it. Anyways, it caught me by surprise. And so all of a sudden I have this, I have this big difference from what I'd wanted to do before. And I think that's great because Cultist Simulator can accommodate those kinds of changes, or it can accommodate sort of lots of different styles, and keeping yourself open to maybe some of these little coincidences. Number one, it's helpful from a gameplay point of view. The more open you are to being able to make use of things like fleeting reminiscences and the influences and such, those can be really helpful. But in addition, being able to have a little bit of a flexibility in terms of the story, a little bit like life, right? You don't necessarily, you can have lots of plans for what you want to do, but circumstances change. Sometimes things, positive and negative, come up that we don't anticipate, and sometimes some of the more interesting stories that we tell about ourselves are those cases where we had to adapt to something unexpectedly. So, in any case, that was a very, very long story, but I sometimes feel, I've noticed for a little, I'm being explained how translation works for some reason in comments and that. So it's always nice to sort of head off some of the comments and that. Like, it's a question in terms of not so much about being aware of whether or not I have the option of working physical labor, but so far as the story of David Ellison is concerned, right? When you're a fairly unimpressive individual who's essentially just sort of riding on Dad's coattails right up until that doesn't happen anymore, and it turns out that all the money's dried up, or at the very least there's not as much as not enough to continue on the life that you had before. I don't necessarily see the first step being the equivalent of like Orwell's Down and Out in London and Paris. There's a few ways that can go, and my hope here is that this particular character maybe doesn't necessarily have to go into the deepest valley. Not that working a physical labor job is the deepest valley. I think you get where I'm going with this. In any case, it would be nice to do some gameplay, so I will add to my collection of essays that I haven't read. Again, much like life. And we have enough money to be able to buy another book from Orland, so we'll take up the funds. Again, I said one of my goals was to try and get better lantern knowledge, but I suspect that's not going to be happening in the next little while, simply because I'm focusing on my creative works. Again, another choice, and another reflection of character. Alright, time the sundial's shadow passes. I must have funds to live, or I will become ill. There are more windows in my soul, but sunlight is not the only thing that passes through a window. So, that's our third lesson learned. Hang on. Okay, I miscounted, so we don't need to worry about the collection of poetry after all. So, once more, we'll feed my imagination. We've got 238 seconds, so we've got plenty of time as far as preservation is concerned. And we're getting close to the end of the affliction, so... Oh! Right, the passion got gobbled up, so I didn't make it to the wood. Oh well, the waters of the wood run cold and deep, but never clear. Rote memory alone will not take me there. I must engage my passion. Now I drift into other dreams. Alright, on the white. So that's one that doesn't require translation. And we'll go back to Moorlands. I think as long as I'm in double-digit funds, I'm happy to keep adding to the books. It takes time to sort the gold from the dross, the wheat from the chaff, the blood from the water. If I buy enough books, I'll find something interesting. Tonight I will dream of a museum. So I think that might give me a glimmering now that I think of it. Okay, we got some money out of that, which was unexpected. My recent work is considered significant. I may yet earn a living from this, but nothing is certain. So we still have this staleness, unfortunately. But we do have some extra mystique to confound the Suppression Bureau with for a little while. We do also have some extra glimmering to improve my talent. This is one thing I kind of like about the way that creativity works in Cultist Simulator. If you think about it right, you've got this character who is spending time on painting, and in this case it's a passion painting. It's something that's maybe a little bit driven more by creative interests rather than, let's say, reputation or commercial imperatives, and as a result there's glimmering. You know, my emotions run higher than usual. There are things I'll never understand, and those things will always be precious, but just now I am closer to them. Which has the aspect moth. I knew a man who captured moths in a bell jar. On nights like this he would release them one by one to die in the candle. Moth is the wild and perilous principle of chaos and yearning. So, you know, descriptions that we might associate with the creative process or maybe creative people. And so the more that we feed our, the more that we feed our craft, we at least have the parts required to improve it. But it's not just enough to... So I think probably anybody who's tried to learn something, whether it's learning an instrument or maybe to draw, so drawing is one of the things I'd like to learn, and I did spend a little bit of time in terms of focused practice on it, but I didn't stick with it. It was might be because of the kind of the program I was going through, and I would like to try and reconnect with it, but there's also only so much time. But it's one thing to put in the time, and that's really important. But there's also the idea of sort of that focused effort that you do. So if you only keep focusing on your elementary practice, you're not necessarily going to reach that level that probably made you want to pursue whatever it was that you were looking for to begin with. So chances are, if you start off with piano, you're not wanting to just play basic introductory piano pieces. Chances are you're wanting to play the type of music that really means something to you. And it can sometimes be frustrating in terms of that sort of practice, because you have this idea of what you want to accomplish, but you don't necessarily have the ability yet. And so I like this idea of glimmering. And in fact, this has sort of been refactored a little bit from how it originally was in the earlier versions of the game. But again, you have the components. You have to focus that in terms of study, and of course, the better you get, the harder it is to get to an even higher level. And again, I'm probably not in a position. I like talking about it, but I'm definitely not in a position to really be talking about, quote unquote, the creative process. But it's a neat way in terms of how the game has sort of worked it out. Like, I think there is something to be said, right? If you can make a living as a painter, chances are the idea of being able to work with your, work your craft, being able to maybe do new and interesting things and push yourself, that is an opportunity available to you. It's not exclusive to people who do it as a profession, but there is an opportunity there to try and do regular things, because you're combining that into the two roles. Whereas, for me, I do broadcasting. I certainly don't pay the bills doing broadcasting, and so that also affords me a certain degree of freedom in terms of the types of things that I do. It's also, I would argue, that this is maybe not quite the same sort of taxing creative activity that other people are doing. But again, if I wanted to do very experimental videos, that option is available to me, and I don't necessarily have that big of a penalty for doing something too weird. Whereas somebody who, like if, I don't know, let's just say Universal Pictures, right? They kind of come out with this incredibly experimental trailer for one of their blockbusters. Well, there are actual consequences for doing that. But with that in mind, you can also see that in terms of Hollywood, in terms of these industries, even the games industry, there are a number of people who are dedicated to sort of advancing it And some of the average work maybe isn't quite to our taste, but I would argue that the quality floor of a Hollywood picture is probably pretty high, especially compared to what the floor of the independent sphere would be. And the only difference is that in the independent sphere, we don't get to see the stuff that was made, on a home, once upon a time on a home video camera. Of course, now it would all be on phones. But just the stuff that doesn't pass a certain quality bar, unless you've had to sort of sit through, a video production student's, final project, we just tend not to see that sort of stuff. So, in any case, I do kind of like the way that glimmering works, and how, depending on your choices in terms of what you pursue in your creative life, how that will have some effects in terms of what doors are open to you as a character, both financially but as well as creatively. In the display cases of the Impossible Museum, I always see an apple white as snow and hard as marble, a golden beetle in a stern box, a koi geometry awaiting my touch, a black envelope bursting with spring, a brass opera box for instruments of record and measure, a storm in a tin. I always wake before I see the aisle's end. Okay, so I do need to start thinking about healing. We can get away with one more trip to the wood. Now, I don't actually have a good plan for how I'm going to get the passion in there, but we're still gonna give it a shot. And you may be wondering why I didn't immediately go back to painting. The main reason for this is I want to try and get a little bit of time down on the notoriety here. So I don't have the option of doing another passion painting. Probably pick a subject. So this is going to lock up the, this is going to wind up locking up the imagination for a while I wait to improve it, but I still think this is the right call. I found something noteworthy. Okay, the Queens and the Rivers. So I have been talking about wanting to get secret histories from the Mansis. I clearly have a few different works that will get me secret histories. We're still above double digits, so we will head back to Moorlands. I don't think I have the option of studying health anymore. The wolf despair prowls elsewhere. No dread empowers this despair. It's over for now. There are more windows in my soul, but sunlight is not the only thing that passes through a window. Okay. So at this point, this is just a matter of getting the imagination in place for the improvement. So we've got 56 seconds left for the affliction. So adding health at this point isn't going to help me out. I think probably here I'm just going to leave the study verb open for a little bit. I could be reading some other books, but in this case I think I want to try and get the painting ready to go as soon as possible. Hang on. I don't have enough. Why did I think I had 4? Right, because we're painting with it. So yes, I want to keep this open. Place behind desire. Is there something to be learnt from the satisfaction of desire? So we found Slee. So this is good for glimmering, but we don't really need glimmering. However, we do get the mystique, which is nice. And now I can add the passion to the investigation. Okay, let's go for... I think we'll talk about lore again, but this time we're going to talk about the Waking Chant. Talking publicly about the invisible arts will attract attention. Perhaps that's what I want. We won't pay for the paints. Again, we've got a lot of staleness here. And we've got another collection of poetry. So all this winds up back at Moorlands, but hopefully it will be... hopefully it'll be something that we... I don't think it's probably much to hope for... competition. But at the very least, hopefully we can get the purchase price back. Crowded thoroughfares by day, a fog-wrapped labyrinth by night. I'll walk the streets seeking secrets until I can walk no more. So I didn't send Laidlaw off to do that because with heart I have the potential, or with health I have the potential of provoking the heart event. I suspect it probably isn't going to help me at this point, but it's nice to have that option. Okay, so more funds. We are now at 4 staleness, so I think it's a miracle we're making any money on this. We've got contentment for our trouble. More glimmering, although at this point we really don't need it. 59 seconds left on the notoriety. This one I'm gonna, well, I don't really have an option, but at this point I'm just gonna let it roll over and hope we don't get unlucky. And in this case, we will grab our lessons learnt. And I can't recall if there's a lantern version of something more for the imagination. There is not. So there's a side of me that wants to think about Moth. Now, I can't remember if Winter is as well. I feel like Winter should have it. No. Okay. So I was actually thinking that maybe Grail was the one that I wanted to go by. So that's Folly, who desires but acts not, breeds pestilence. And then we also have Moth, which is Unreason. Cut my hair, cut my bonds, cut my snip, snip, snip. I think probably part of this was just, I wanted to double check which, I definitely remember the Reason quite a bit better than I remember the Passion, probably more of a reflection of me than anything else. But I was also thinking it'd be kind of neat as long as Grail was an option, which was one I was fairly certain, but I mostly wanted to see Winter, to be honest. Although, again, Lantern is more consistent with what we're going for. But in this case here, I actually like the idea of there being sort of the echoes of the family legacy and my previous interests holding on in my imagination. So, who desires but acts not breeds pestilence. So 1 minute and we hit our top level. Now, with that in mind, we have achieved a bit of a milestone that we were looking for. So in this case, what I would want to maybe do is either pursue health or pursue vitality or erudition, just because that will help me improve my health and my reason. I suspect probably erudition is a little bit easier for me to go for, particularly because I get to choose certain types of lore to work with. But we'll see. For the time being, though, we keep the work slot open because I'm not able to do the commission. And we have old and happy far off things that we will paint away when the time comes. So we can get an occult scrap. I'm going to take a run at the well in hopes that we can maybe walk away with some vitality. Ah, brilliant. The Mansus giveth in this case. Exercise, or something rarer, has invigorated me. The well in the wood is sacred to the Grail, the hour that hungers, and to the velvet, the hour that guards secrets. Tonight, as I approached, it heaved with the velvet's moss, struggling waves of deep and vibrant green, pulsing again and again from its throat. It surged around my calves, rose to my thighs, and this morning I still feel the velvet's breath strong within me. So to give you an idea, again, I don't mean to be tiresome about this point of view, but this is one of the things I sort of like when you think about the types of characters that emerge out of a playthrough as opposed to one that you just impose on a playthrough. So clearly David Ellison got very lucky in terms of their birth, right? You don't necessarily get any... I don't even know why I said necessarily, but you don't get a say in terms of the circumstances that you're born into, and certainly Ellison was not necessarily doing anything that indicated they were making the most of that opportunity. But unlike other adepts, or maybe aspiring adepts, or maybe not even necessarily aspiring adepts, but those who have fallen into it by chance, so far David Ellison seems to have avoided the kinds of traps that emerge, and more importantly has also made some specific choices in terms of how they want to sort of either define themselves or set out on their own. Now, what's also interesting here, right, is that this is the sort of person who has actually gotten a fairly successful art career, right? I've got a very large library of books, something that I originally sort of inherited from my past life as as someone who just did a bit of this, did a bit of that, had some interesting friends who'd take me out to the Ecdysis Club or Flam's Auction House. And I wasn't necessarily buying them as an adept. In fact, one might argue that maybe I just don't have all that good of a habit or the discipline to be able to read more of these books, and that I've been spending a bit more time in terms of the arts. But one way or another, I have been able to achieve this career on the art scene. And of course, you can have the debate. It's something that we talked about in the earlier video, right? Is this a function of my upbringing? Well, it's not that this character was necessarily endowed with a very large amount of passion. To a certain extent, I've worked it, but then I also didn't feel the need to just take the health and go and work the physical labor, right? Yes, I have those talents as a painter, but I have those talents as a painter because I had a big stack of funds from the inheritance to be able to cover me while I pursued that. And so in this case here, I've achieved a certain degree of financial success on my own as far as the game is concerned. And of course, there's the interesting question, would this have happened without that implicit financial backing brought on by Papa's death? One would say no, and that's just simply because I wouldn't necessarily have pursued painting in the first place, but that's another question. But the other thing that's kind of interesting about this, and again, I didn't want to focus too much on the job side of things, is that through going to the world of Dream and trying the Velvet, we, as the player, knew enough to check out the Velvet and get the Vitality, and that was certainly what I was going for. But, that wasn't the only option. We have 29 seconds left on the Affliction, so whether or not I need to spend the money on the medicine or whether we have supernatural means, in this case here, we actually have sort of this supernatural event which has restored my health. And in this case, again, it's one of these really difficult ones to deal with in the real world, because luck is absolutely something that happens to people. And in this particular case, this is a guy who seems to be getting absolutely all the breaks, one of the really infuriating kind of people. And this person, I think, would rightly consider them to be quite hardworking now, right? They're pretty consistently going to the painting, and they're building up their skill, and even though they're sick, they're getting the work done. And so what can be kind of interesting for this playthrough for myself here is not necessarily just thinking of the character myself. I'm obviously very attached to David Ellison because it's me. It's who I'm playing right now. But sometimes it's kind of fun to consider, what does this person look like from the outside, right? If you're playing the physician, what does this person look like? What do you know about the lives of doctors? Some of you who watch this may be doctors yourself and have a very different perspective on what life as a physician is compared to another. And of course, this takes place around, I think, the 1920s, so there's obviously some other differences as well. But one of the things I do find kind of fun, again, when you sort of roll with the punches and when you have the fun events that sort of pop up inside of the game, whether you decide to look at it through the lens of myself, what did I just reveal about my character by going down a certain path, or this little thought experiment here, what does this person seem like to someone else, right? Someone who, by any account, is someone who says, oh yeah, they got all the breaks, grew up in a fairly affluent family, went to the right schools and all of that. Well, that's all true, but it turns out that also this person does actually seem to have some natural talent, which has been allowed to flourish. And I think this is maybe one of the things that keeps me coming back to Cultist Simulator, particularly as a story generator, is that there is a great amount of complexity in human experience. I know we like to sort of flatten things out and say these are the good people and these are the bad people. And I'm as prone to that as anyone else. Obviously, I don't have the same amount of sympathy when I'm thinking of that jerk. Even on like Twitch or YouTube, I don't think this way about those jerks. But it's kind of neat inside of Cultist Simulator if you just scratch a little bit below the surface. If you want, there is all of that complexity and all of that difference that can be expressed inside of the game. And that's largely just kind of coming down to the fact that the game has sort of represented its world inside of cards. And again, when you think of yourself yes, you can think of yourself as your physical body. You can think of yourself as your possessions. You can think of yourself as your knowledge, your ideal, your wants, your creativity. You can think of yourself in terms of your associations. All of these things are ways that we describe ourselves and the ways that we talk about ourselves. And they don't always follow that one note, right? Even though I might be very, I may follow in the path of the Watchman. I may be kind of mean when pressed, and I don't know. I have at least a narrow area of expertise that I think I can claim some cleverness in. But it would be hard for me to say, even though I do have my lanternish tendencies, it's not that I don't find the other principles interesting or things that I couldn't relate to. And again, there's that difference in terms of how the mundane world has been represented, how the principles behind that world have been represented, and there's of course tremendous variety, which maybe you only get to see through experience. What I mean by that is just you need to have the highs and lows. In this game, you need to have the highs and lows of life experience to actually encounter all of the principles. If you just stick with funds, health, reason, and passion, you get to see heart, lantern, and moth. But in order to encounter forge and edge and winter, those are going to be things where you have to have other experiences. In any case, I've gone over time. We are going to heal ourselves. All I need now is time. And sorry for the extra digressions. I know I generally get positive feedback on that, but I know some of you also want to see some progress on the playthrough. So this should be Monday's episode. I will be back on Wednesday. Again, Tuesdays are an off day. I will be having there will be videos for those when I can, but I'm still catching up on a few things. So thank you very much for watching. I will see you the day after tomorrow. Take care.